It was midnight. The globe was resting. But in that hush, one woman's reality shattered countless souls. Her name, Karen Malina White. For eras, she uttered nothing. For years, she carried her quiet like a coffin on her heart. But on this evening, Malcolm Jamal Warner's birthday, she broke. And the internet may never mend again. People anticipated a gentle tribute, a soft, divine birthday post. But what Karen shared was not a memory. It was a revelation, a marriage license. Real ink, real marks, real seals, and two names bound together in eternity. Malcolm Jamal Warner and Karen Malina White. Beneath it, only 5 words. Now you know the reality. Twitter crumbled, Instagram drowned in messages. Supporters cried, "Please God, let this be fake." But Karen didn't stop. Minutes later, she released a blurry video. Malcolm's voice shaking, holding a sheet of paper, whispering a verse for her. And when his final words came, the internet went still. "You are not just my love, you are my rightful beginning." He had named her his wife, his legal wife. And in that single instant, the globe realized Karen wasn't just an old spark. She was the woman he had pledged eternity to. But the question that tore everyone apart was this: why now? Why break the silence after all these decades? Karen's reply was simple, and it was crushing. Because Malcolm asked me to. We hid our love for calm. But now that he's gone, I must give him the dignity he gave me. Those words devastated millions. TikTok flooded with weeping reactions, supporters collapsing under the weight of her reality. Because sometimes the loudest devotion is the love the world never knew existed, until the grave tears it wide open. The clock had just struck midnight. For much of the globe, it was just another still night. But for millions who would rise only hours later, their hearts would be shattered beyond healing. Because in that quiet hour, one woman broke decades of silence. And her truth erupted across the internet like thunder ripping through the heavens. That woman was Karen Malina White. For years, people murmured her name in connection with Malcolm Jamal Warner. Old gossip, vague whispers, and fan ideas had drifted in the background, but nothing solid ever surfaced. Karen never admitted. Malcolm never confronted it. It was as though some unseen barrier of silence shielded whatever secret they carried. Until this evening, his birthday. The globe expected the same sort of divine birthday message everyone posts after losing a dear one. A soft note, a smiling picture, maybe a sorrowful caption. But what Karen revealed was not tender, not sentimental, not even expected. It was an eruption, a single snapshot, a scanned file, a marriage license, not a whisper, not a fan creation, not a phony tabloid story. This was genuine. With valid signatures, lawful seals, and names that left no space for denial, Malcolm Jamal Warner and Karen Malina White beneath just 5 words. Now you know the reality. In less than 3 minutes, Twitter flared. People shouted in shock. Instagram comments flowed in by the thousands. "This can't be true. Please, God, let this be false. I'm trembling. I can't inhale." But the grief was only starting because moments later, Karen shared again. This time it wasn't a file. It was a recording. A blurry clip, shaky and dimly lit as if pulled from an old family tape. In it, Malcolm stood beneath soft glow, a paper quivering in his hands. His voice fractured with every line. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't performing for audiences. He was reciting a verse written for Karen. His voice carried the weight of loyalty and the tremor of dread like a man revealing his spirit in its barest state. And when he reached the final phrase, the internet went quiet. No trolling, no jokes, no noise, just silence. "You are not just my love. You are my rightful beginning. Rightful beginning." The words struck like thunder. He hadn't just cherished her. He had wed her. He had claimed her in the eyes of the law, and he had eternalized that reality in his own voice. Supporters who had once dismissed the whispers as gossip were now left gasping for air. Karen wasn't just some buried chapter in Malcolm's story. She was the woman he had chosen as his spouse. Within moments, hashtags surged. She was his wife. Karen and Malcolm. rightful beginning. TikTok filled with response clips of fans breaking down in sobs, replaying the footage again and again as if trying to absorb the impossible. Some collapsed mid-recording, crying uncontrollably. Others murmured, "I feel betrayed by history. How did none of us know this?" But the most piercing question wasn't whether the marriage was true. That was unquestionable. The mystery that tormented everyone was simple. Why now? Why uncover this secret after decades? Why shatter the silence only once Malcolm was gone? Karen answered that too, and her words were enough to tear hearts apart. "Because Malcolm asked me to," she wrote, "we kept our love hidden for calm, but now that he's not here, I must give him the dignity he gave me." Dignity. That word carried the sting of closure. She wasn't reaching for fame. She wasn't trying to profit from his memory. She was simply honoring his last request. And yet, with that confession, a storm far greater than sorrow began to rise. Because Karen's reality didn't just rewrite their romance, it had the strength to collapse everything the public believed they knew about Malcolm's bonds. For years, Tracee Ellis Ross had been tied to Malcolm. Tales of a private ceremony, whispers about a hidden child, and even legal disputes involving DNA records and insurance funds worth $200 million. But if Karen's license was real, if her proof held up in court, then every single one of Tracee's claims would crumble like sandcastles against the waves. The internet erupted with arguments. Some praised Karen as a heroine for finally sharing her truth. Others accused her of betrayal, of timing her revelation for maximum shock. But most simply wept. Because beyond the drama, beyond the legal wreckage, beyond the celebrity noise, the rawest, most gutting image was a woman mourning her husband in silence for years, then finally breaking that silence because the man she cherished had asked her to. One fan posted, "This isn't just gossip. This is the saddest love story I've ever witnessed." Another wrote, "Karen carried his secret so he could have peace. Now she carries his truth so he can have dignity. I can't stop crying." TikTok's Stitch feature turned into a flood of grief. Creators held the license in one frame and in the next, their tear-stained faces whispering, "She was his wife. She was his wife." But even as the internet drowned in sorrow, Karen delivered one final strike. Her last post of the evening wasn't a file or a clip, but a picture, a simple, heart-crushing image. And under it, a caption that became eternal, overnight. "You told me to love you in silence. I did, but now I must mourn you out loud." That line alone ripped through millions of souls. Instagram stories filled with nothing but those words. Fans tattooed them. People who had never even followed Malcolm or Karen before suddenly found themselves crying in bed, clutching their phones as if the weight of love and grief had seeped into their own lives. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It wasn't even just a confession. It had become a tragedy. A tragedy bound in love, sealed in silence, and cracked open only by death. And as the hours passed, one truth became unshakable. Karen Malina White had not only revealed a marriage, she had revealed a legacy. One that would haunt admirers, spark legal wars, and redefine everything the globe thought it knew about Malcolm Jamal Warner. Because love and quiet may shield hearts, but love and truth, it shakes the ground. The morning after Karen Malina White's midnight revelations, the world woke to a storm it could not outrun. Newspapers shouted the headline in bold. Talk shows scrambled to cover it, and fans still trembling from the night before were now bracing for something even heavier. The legal battle that was about to erupt. Because Karen's reality wasn't just a confession, it was proof. And in the eyes of the law, proof is everything. Almost instantly, Tracee Ellis Ross's name exploded across social feeds. For years, her link to Malcolm Jamal Warner had been a murmur cloaked in rumors. She had hinted ever so carefully about her tie with him. Some magazines even claimed she had a hidden wedding. Others went further, suggesting a concealed child backed by supposed DNA tests. And then came the towering claim, a $200 million life insurance contract allegedly binding her name to Malcolm's estate. But now, with one midnight post, everything shifted. If Karen's license was genuine, every claim Tracee had made would tumble like a house of cards in a gale. Court insiders murmured that lawyers were already circling like hawks. Karen's papers weren't just social content bait. They were the kind of evidence that judges respected, stamped signs sealed, a legal union recognized by the state. If authentic, it would strip away Tracy's narrative, her alleged files, her financial claims. In court, there is no room for noise, only for truth. But while the attorneys prepared, the internet ripped itself apart. Fans split into sides. One camp shouted support for Karen, praising her for fulfilling Malcolm's last wish. They flooded her comments with love, with tears, with prayers. The other camp clung desperately to Tracy's memory, calling Karen a liar, a manipulator, someone who had waited for Malcolm's passing to exploit his name. The hashtags mirrored the fracture. Justice for Karen, Team Tracy, Lawful Wife. Tick. Talk duets showed admirers reading Karen's captions through sobs, only to cut to clips of Tracy on red carpets, smiling, posing, living her dazzling life. The emotional whiplash tore people apart, and then came the courtroom leaks. According to insiders, Karen's legal team had already filed motions to secure her position as Malcolm's widow. The marriage certificate, they argued, was only the start. There were witnesses. There were photos. There were private recordings, just like the grainy clip Karen had shared. This wasn't about social media clout. This was about establishing truth in the face of lies. Tracy's side, however, was not quiet. Her team fired back instantly, dismissing Karen's files as selective storytelling. They promised counterproof, claiming they held receipts of their own, documents, statements, and evidence that would discredit Karen's marriage claim. Suddenly, the mourning world was dragged into a legal circus. Morning shows ran features where attorneys argued live. Some insisted Karen's evidence was ironclad. Others warned that in celebrity estates, nothing is ever what it looks like. One anchor murmured what many feared. If Karen's union is proven true, Tracy Ellis Ross could lose everything: her claims, her credibility, even her reputation as America's darling. The tension only deepened when old interviews resurfaced. Clips of Malcolm speaking vaguely about a private love I'll never discuss were suddenly dissected under a new lens. Fans scoured his old tweets, old snapshots, old interviews. Every phrase now carried the weight of prophecy. But within all the chaos, the most painful part was Karen herself. Because while the internet battled over sides, she was not soaking in fame. She wasn't doing features, wasn't profiting. She was mourning quietly, posting nothing but black screens with captions like, "He wanted peace and I wanted him." Those words only made admirers cry harder. TikTok flooded with edits of Malcolm's video verse. That final line, "You are my rightful beginning," became an anthem of heartbreak. Some paired it with soft piano music, others with church choirs. Millions of views surged in overnight. Even celebrities began to weigh in. Some stood with Karen, calling her bravery the most devastating act of love. Others cautiously held back, anxious about the legal storm Tracy's camp was promising. And then, like thunder, came the most savage twist of all. In a leaked deposition, Tracy's lawyers argued that Malcolm's supposed marriage to Karen was nothing more than an outdated technicality. They claimed the union was never public, never honored, and therefore never real in the spirit of the law. The internet erupted. Fans were enraged. How could a marriage license be dismissed as not real? How could vows whispered in private carry less weight than a staged red carpet romance? One fan wrote, "So, because Karen didn't display her love, it doesn't count. That's disgusting. Real love doesn't need an audience." Another raged, "Tracy is trying to erase Karen the way history erased Black women's stories. For generations." The backlash was immediate, ferocious, and unrelenting. Tracy's Instagram overflowed with hostile comments. Her followers dropped by the tens of thousands. Brands she was linked to quietly began scrubbing her from campaigns. The internet had chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. But while Tracy's image burned, Karen's grief only deepened. Because with every court motion, with every fresh article, her mourning was being turned into spectacle. What was once a romance buried in silence had now become the world's most public war. And yet, through all of it, Karen held her ground. In a rare post, she wrote, "The world thinks I want money. I want peace. Malcolm told me, when the time comes, tell them. Don't let me disappear. And so I did. This is not about winning. This is about not letting him be forgotten. Those words shattered whatever defense her critics had left. Because in the end, it wasn't about Karen versus Tracy. It wasn't about insurance payouts or fame. It was about devotion. A devotion so powerful it was hidden to survive, and so tragic it only surfaced after death. Fans began calling it the saddest love tale of the century. TikTok edits carried captions like, "She hid her love to protect him. She confessed her devotion to cherish him." The phrase became a prayer murmured through sobs by countless across the world. And as the court struggle stormed on, one fact stayed unbroken. No matter what the judges ruled, no matter what Tracy's attorneys insisted, no matter how much chaos tried to bury it, Malcolm's own voice would last eternally. "You are not just my heart, you are my rightful beginning." That single phrase was more mighty than any attorney, any chamber, any accusation. It was the pure, irrefutable fact of a man who had adored, wed, and cherished Karen Malina White, even if the public only discovered it too late. Because sometimes proof isn't a paper. Sometimes proof is the way a tone cracks when it calls your name. And in that tone, Karen had already triumphed. The chamber was filled, not with reporters, not with flashing bulbs, but with the heavy hush of legacy about to be reshaped. On one side, Karen Malina White, steady, composed, clothed in black, holding a folder close to her chest like it was the final piece of Malcolm she had kept. On the other side, Tracy Ellis Ross, graceful, refined, her counsel surrounding her like shields. The magistrate entered, the audience rose, and in that instant, the planet held its breath. For weeks, the web had been ripped apart. Hashtags launched battles. Karen's midnight revelation had startled millions, while Tracy's rejection stirred turmoil. But here in this chamber, no hashtag mattered. No roaring crowds, no edits, only proof. Karen's counsel spoke first. He spread out the records with careful precision, the union license signed and sealed, witness declarations verifying the vows, images too personal to be staged, and then the real. The same blurry clip Karen had shared online, but now shown on the chamber projector. Malcolm's quivering tone filled the silence. "You are not just my heart, you are my rightful beginning." The hall froze. Even the magistrate lowered his gaze, the weight of those phrases too immense to dismiss. Tracy's counsel struck back, arguing the union was a formality, never celebrated openly, never admitted to the crowd. But Karen's counsel sliced through the uproar with one crushing phrase. "In the sight of the law, you don't need a public to be a spouse. You just need the fact." And the fact is right here. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Outside, journalists typed frantically, their alerts flooding the web in real moments. Admirers across the globe tuned into live feeds, clutching napkins, whispering, hopes for Karen. And then it unfolded. Karen was called to the chair. She stepped slowly, every stride loaded with sorrow. When she spoke, her tone was firm, but her eyes were seas. "For years I adored Malcolm in quiet," she began. "Not because I was embarrassed, but because we both longed for calm. Fame is noisy. Devotion is still. He told me the world doesn't need to see. We see. And so I guarded our truth. Not for a day, not for a season, but for years. I buried my own secret so he could have calm." Her words cut like blades. People in the gallery sobbed openly. Even the stenographer's fingers shook as she typed. Karen went on. "But before he departed, he looked at me and said, 'When I'm gone, don't let them erase you. Don't let them erase us. That's why I'm here. Not for wealth, not for glory, but because I vowed to my husband, that I would give him the dignity he gave me.'" The courtroom melted into tears. Tracy's attorneys protested, but it was pointless. Because in that instant, no objection could erase the fact carved into Karen's tone. Outside, social platforms erupted. She Washi Swife trended globally. Admirers flooded Karen's page with messages of unity. Even stars who had stayed quiet began to speak out, sharing Karen's words, calling her testimony the most devastating act of devotion we've ever witnessed. The judge drew a deep breath before giving his decision. His tone was weighty, intentional. This court acknowledges Karen Malina White as the rightful wife of Malcolm Jamal Warner. It was finished. With those words, the uproar collapsed. The conflict ended. The hashtag stopped clashing. History had been reshaped. Karen closed her eyes, not in triumph, but in grief, because this was never about winning. It was about remembering. Tracy exited the courtroom in silence, her face hidden behind dark lenses, her empire shattered in real time, companies cutting ties, admirers turning their backs, her name sinking in scandal. But Karen didn't glance her way. She wasn't there for payback. She was there for Malcolm. And then in the days that followed, Karen gave the world one last offering. She posted one final remembrance. Not a paper, not a recording, just a snapshot. A faded, gentle photo of her and Malcolm smiling in each other's arms. Not staged, not polished, just love in its truest form. The caption was only 12 words. You told me to love in quiet. Now I mourn out loud. Those words shattered the internet. TikTok drowned in edits of that phrase layered over soft piano, Malcolm's voice in the distance, Karen's image fading into black. Instagram stories were filled with nothing else. Admirers inked the line onto their skin. News outlets called it the single most devastating post of the century. But the most haunting part was the ripple wave. People across the globe began sharing their own hidden devotion stories. Partners who had kept their bonds secret, widows who had never spoken about their sorrow. Karen's truth became a mirror reflecting every silent ache people had buried deep within. In a way, her tale became greater than Malcolm, greater than Tracy, greater than the chamber. It became a movement, a reminder that genuine love doesn't always need clapping. That sometimes the purest tales are the ones whispered in the shadows, kept safe from the world's noise until the day they finally demand to be felt. Karen herself faded from the spotlight after that last post. No interviews, no media tours, no book contracts, just silence. The same silence she had carried for decades, except now it wasn't a silence of hiding. It was a silence of rest because she had kept her vow. She had honored the man she adored. And in doing so, she had given the globe a love story so fierce, so crushing, so unforgettable that it would echo forever. And as admirers looked back on it all, the midnight message, the blurry reel, the courtroom sobs, the last tribute, one fact stood above the wreckage. Karen Malina White wasn't just Malcolm Jamal Warner's spouse. She was the proof that some devotion stories are too strong to stay buried. Because sometimes love doesn't live in clapping. It lives in quiet. And when quiet finally speaks, the whole globe listens. And now as we sit with this fact, shattered, stunned, and tear-streaked, the question is not whether Karen Malina White was his spouse. The question is, how do we the people carry this story forward? Because this is not just chatter. This is not just a scandal. This is the raw, burning truth of a woman who gave her life, her quiet, her soul for devotion. And when the man she called husband left this earth, she refused to let him leave without his fact. That is not spectacle. That is sacrifice. That is love in its most brutal form. And maybe that's why millions of souls cannot stop crying tonight. Because deep down, we all know what it means to adore someone in quiet, to carry a truth that the world may never grasp. And Karen gave that truth a voice. But the storm doesn't close here. No, this is only the dawn. Courtrooms will echo, reputations will be shattered, and the internet will not sleep because every hour, new truths are rising, and each one is heavier than the last. So ask yourself, are you ready to hear the rest of what Karen has to reveal? Are you ready to face the secrets Malcolm left behind? Because I assure you what's coming next will break your spirit even deeper than tonight. Don't scroll away, don't turn away. Hit that subscribe button, turn on alerts, and stay with us because this tale is not over. Not by a long measure. And remember this, true devotion doesn't need the world's clapping. But when the quiet finally breaks, the world cannot look away.